The Chicago Sky fired head coach Teresa Weatherspoon after one season. I definitely know how I feel about this firing, but it's not a black and white situation where it's all good or all bad. Like, it's a mixture of both right now. I have a very nuanced view on this firing, so I just want to make a video on it and say how I feel about it. So the main reason why I was somewhat okay with the Teaspoon firing is because she wasn't a good coach in this season. She built good relationships with the star players, but X's and O's wise, on court wise, she wasn't good. The offense was very stagnant because there wasn't a system put into place, or if there was, it just wasn't working. They were basically just out there playing freelance offense most of the time, which would work if they had more talented scorers, but they didn't. They just didn't have the talent to play that way. And that's no disrespect to anyone on the team personally. It's just that they didn't have the personnel to play that style of game and consistently win. The only plays that were being run were some pick and roll sometimes, but the screens were half-hearted and barely ever led to anything. On top of that, I didn't see many off-ball screens to get players open, which I mainly see used for shooters, but even though they didn't have many shooters on this team, off-ball screens still could have helped this offense out some. Speaking of off-ball, there was just very little movement unless someone had the ball in their hands or they were involved in the pick and roll. There were countless times this season when Angel and Kamilla were getting doubled and tripled, which hypothetically means that someone should have been open, but the passing lanes just weren't there because the players just stood around and wouldn't help Angel out on the boards or try to make themselves more available to take advantage of the compromised defense. A whole season of this stuff happened. That's on coaching. Another thing that I didn't like about Teaspoon is also play calling related, but this time it's focusing on clutch games. They left some games on the table this season because of their inability to generate quality offense in the clutch. There's a lot to choose from, but the set that I want to focus on is the 3-game stretch from the second half of the season where they lost to the Sun, Aces, and Mystics by a combined 8 points. In the Sun game, down 82-80 with 4 seconds left, Lindsay inbounded the ball to Rachel and got it deflected by Mabry because the screens that Angel and Kamilla set were ineffective. Then on the final possession right after that, Lindsay inbounded the ball to Angel. Angel passed it back and tried to screen for Lindsay for a deep 3 way out of her range, but Dejanay stole the ball, ending the game. They were not able to get up a shot attempt, and even if they were, they wouldn't have got good looks because Rachel and Lindsay were so far away from the basket and they had a defender draped all over them. Next game, Aces game. After Chennedy hit a miracle 3 with 1 second left to potentially send the game to overtime, they gave up a game-winning layup to Aja. In a game where Kamilla had 5 blocks on Aja, she was stuck guarding the inbounder, which just wasn't the best decision. Now, in the following Aces game, Kamilla got fried, but in this specific Aces game where Kamilla had 5 blocks on Aja and she just couldn't score on Kamilla, that just wasn't good situational basketball for this game, not good on-the-fly coaching. What ended up happening was that Plum screened Angel, and that's how Aja got open. But even if the same thing happened to Kamilla, I could live with that. They got beat by a good play regardless, but they made it easier for the Aces to score by not having their #1 shot blocker in that play. So even if they still would have lost that game, it's just bad process, which for a rebuilding team, that should be the priority. Then going over to the Mystics game, with about 3:50 left in the game, she wasted a challenge on a clear Michaela foul and it ended up being unsuccessful. I didn't like this because Michaela is a fouling machine. Like, of course she fouled. Save the challenge for the bigs, especially for someone like Kamilla because her whistle was rough in the second half of the season. This challenge comes into play because with 2:24 left, Angel was called for a foul on Sykes when it was all ball, but they couldn't challenge it. Sykes only made 1 free throw to cut the deficit down to 2 points, but in a game like that, every point matters. Then, with 30 seconds left down 2, instead of calling a timeout to make an attempt at running a play, she let Dana Lindsay, and Michaela dribble out the shot clock. The ball didn't even make its way over to Kamilla, the person that scored their last bucket in the final 4 minutes and 30 seconds of the game. And before I talk about Kamilla, I'm just going to finish up talking about these last few plays. So similar to the Connecticut game, 3 seconds left, but this time they're down 4, so they're probably not going to win. But anyways, it's just 2 straight plays of Lindsay inbounding to Angel and getting it deflected, then stolen, just like in the Connecticut game. In the span of like 5 days, they got 4 attempts at a similar situation and couldn't even generate a shot attempt. Now getting to Kamilla, for some reason at the 5:50 mark, she was taken out of the game for Izzy when the Sky had momentum. Then she came back into the game at the 2:24 mark, and in that span, they only scored 2 points without her. That was the time to put the game away. That stretch cost them the game. The bigs weren't really fed that much in the game, which also leads into my next point. But that's 3 straight clutch games when I don't care if it's a win or a loss. Just show improvement, just show better process, and that didn't happen. And it's not just these 3 games, like they're just the ones that I decided to single out because they're 3 straight games and it's the second half of the season. So they've already had more than half of the season to learn the playbook, just showing that regardless of the roster or the win-loss record, the team didn't get better as the year went on. They didn't evolve. The team doesn't actually have to win games to get better, especially in a rebuilding year. 3 straight clutch losses, losing 2 of them in similar ways, and I'm just talking about this 3-game stretch. Teaspoon's coaching didn't evolve as the season went on, especially in late game scenarios, constantly making the same mistakes over and over again and losing games in the same fashion. Next, talking about the bigs. The bigs were the best players on the team, or at least top 3. But despite that, all season long, the guards just didn't want to pass to the bigs like that, constantly ignoring them whenever they got seals or were open, looking them off just to dribble the shot clock out or hoist up a floater that never went in. I just felt like there weren't any consequences for this. Like, even when Dana didn't play against the Sparks, I don't see her not feeding the bigs as a reason why she was benched. That's something that Teaspoon should have established, but it just never changed as the year went on. Speaking of never changing, that goes into my next point. All of this stuff that I just talked about never changed as the season went on. The team didn't evolve. Now, they traded Mabry and their roster in the second half of the season was worse and the win-loss record was worse. But I'm not even talking about that. I've mainly been talking about process. They're not running any plays. Even when they run plays, they just don't work. They don't generate good offense, and they're still losing close games in the exact same way. Even late into the season, like I pointed out in the Sun and Mystics game that were a few days apart, they had 4 possessions in the clutch to get a shot up, but they couldn't even get up a shot attempt. 2 deflections and 2 turnovers. That's not a talent thing at all. She's just not a good X's and O's coach, and she didn't get better as the season went along, losing games in the exact same way and fashion. There was no improvement at all. She could have got better if she got another season, but that's a hypothetical, and based on what was actually shown, there's no reason to believe that she would have got better outside of blind faith. Outside of being a good motivator, there's nothing from an X's and O's standpoint that she brought to the table that looked promising going into the next season. She didn't implement anything that made me say, oh, with a healthy roster and maybe perfecting it a little bit, this could be scary in the future. None of that. I can't even give her the overachieved card because while the team was projected to be 12th and they finished 10th, a good amount of the wins that they got were off the strength of Angel, Chennedy, and Marina when she was on the team. Just because Teaspoon was coaching the team, that doesn't mean that she gets to take all of the credit for the wins that they got. Sometimes the team was fighting against her bad rotations and clutch time decision making even in wins, and it never improved as the season went on. I've been very consistent. I don't really care about the win-loss record that much. Bad coaches can end up with a good record, not because they're a good coach, but because they have a good team, good talent, and I've seen that a bunch of times. I'm not clinging onto the record or the idea that Teaspoon had them competing for the playoffs until the last day of the season, because I know that's not necessarily the truest statement ever. I know that context has to be added to that statement. Like I just went over, she wasn't the only reason why the Sky were in that position, and there wasn't much specifically about her coaching that I can point to and say, That's why they won this game right here. It's because of Teaspoon. That rarely happens. So the competing for the playoffs aspect isn't the best defense because it wasn't all her. So I know that I was okay with seeing her leave. Like the first year head coach aspect and the cries of should have got another year mean less and less when realizing that there's nothing that she showed in this year that even looked promising going into the next season. It really sounds like she should have got another year just to have another year, just because she connects well with certain players, just to keep some stability, which there is some value in stability and player relations, but that's not enough to keep someone around that wasn't the best coach and didn't show signs of improvement as the year went on and showed nothing inspiring going into the next season. So I know that I'm okay with the firing, but looking at it from another perspective, I don't agree with the Sky's actual reason for firing her. Apparently, they fired her because she didn't lead them to the playoffs, but that shouldn't have been a realistic goal considering that Copper got traded before the season began, Elizabeth Williams went down, Kamilla wasn't there to start the season, Mabry got traded, Chennedy got sick in the middle of that 7-game losing streak, Angel had a season-ending injury, and Kamilla and Chennedy sat for the remaining 2 games of the season. They could have made the playoffs, like they were in it, but it wasn't something that should have been expected, especially considering everything that I just said. I think that if the Sky's reason aligned with my reason where it wasn't win-based, it was the fact that the team never really improved under her as the season went along. The process never got better. If it was something like that, then I would agree, but their reasoning doesn't really make as much sense right now, especially since they refused to sign players or trade for an actual point guard when players were going down, and they clearly needed a point guard. They needed a person to replace Elizabeth Williams for this season. I also don't like this because of the outrage. The star players don't like the move, and there's a lot of trashing of the Chicago Sky organization going on right now. I don't really see a big problem with her firing, but the outrage just makes me worried about the future of some of the players on this team and possible free agents they could get, the possible coach that they can get. Like, that's all in jeopardy right now, potentially. Teaspoon was a first-year head coach, so it's a bad look to fire her after just 1 season, but also something that's gone very under the radar, very underreported, is that Teaspoon was hired before the new GM got there, so she probably wasn't even part of the vision going forward. She probably was never supposed to be the coach for this season had Jeff got there before her. That just has to be put into context to somewhat rationalize this decision. Like, it seems wild, but when piecing everything together, I can somewhat make sense of it. But I can't expect that others will, and I don't want that to affect free agency because this is a promising team. They have a big 3. Hopefully, Chennedy is a restricted free agent, and if the Sky want her, they can have her. They have the most cap space in the league. Keep the big 3, get a point guard, get some shooters around them, then this is a legitimate team. I don't want all of this to fall apart just because of a coach. Ultimately, I'm not going to harp on this decision to fire Teaspoon. Like, I don't like to harp on things in life. Like, it's not really an emotional thing for me. When taking everything into context, I don't look at Teaspoon as this big fallen angel, and I'm not giving her an emotional send-off and coddling her and ignoring everything that I said about her coaching failures throughout the season and campaigning for her to get another year, which is just a waste of breath at this point. Like, it's not going to come, at least with the Sky. They let go of her and nothing can be changed about that. So it's just time to move forward, and hopefully she can have success in whatever path she goes down next. At the end of the day, the quality of this move is going to be decided by the next coach that they bring in and how successful the team is under their leadership. So yeah, that's all I have to say for now.